The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton as Specialist Rachel Hayes adjusted her combat gear for the third time. At 26, she had the kind of natural beauty that turned heads wherever she went, long auburn hair tucked neatly. Under her helmet, warm bronze skin that seemed to glow even in military fatigues, and striking blue eyes that radiated an intelligence most people chose to ignore. "Look at our recruitment poster girl," Sergeant Miller announced as Rachel approached the training formation. "Bet the photographers love those pretty blue eyes." The other soldiers chuckled, some louder than others. Rachel had heard variations of this comment every single day since arriving at the base 6 months ago. She kept her expression neutral, shoulders squared, eyes forward. "Hayes," Miller continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "you'll be running communications today. Can't have our poster child getting those manicured nails dirty with real combat work." More laughter rippled through the ranks. Rachel noticed how Corporal Davis, who had arrived at the same time she had, was assigned to lead the tactical assault team, a position she was more than qualified for, but would never be offered. During the morning briefing, Captain Reynolds outlined their training scenario: urban warfare simulation, high-stress environment, live ammunition exercises. As he spoke, Rachel mentally cataloged every tactical weakness in their approach, every blind spot in their formation, every potential failure point in their strategy. She'd done this type of operation dozens of times before, in places that would make this training look like a children's game. "Any questions?" Captain Reynolds asked. Rachel started to raise her hand. She'd noticed a critical flaw in their extraction route, one that could get people killed in a real situation. But before she could speak, Sergeant Miller's voice cut across the room. "Save it, Hayes. Communications operators don't need to worry about strategy. Just look pretty and relay our messages." The room erupted in quiet snickers. Rachel slowly lowered her hand, but Captain Reynolds had already moved on, either not noticing her attempt to contribute or simply not caring. As the briefing dispersed, Private Johnson, a young soldier who'd always been kind to her, approached hesitantly. "Hey, Rachel," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "That was pretty messed up. You obviously had something important to say." Rachel appreciated his support, but she'd learned not to draw attention to the few allies she had. "It's fine, Johnson. Just focus on your own mission." But it wasn't fine. As she walked toward the communications trailer, Rachel felt the familiar weight of frustration settling in her chest. 6 months of proving herself through flawless performance. 6 months of watching less qualified soldiers get opportunities she deserved. 6 months of being dismissed because her appearance didn't match their idea of what a warrior should look like. What made it worse was the knowledge that she could outshoot, outfight, and outthink most of the soldiers who mocked her. In her previous life, a life that officially didn't exist, she had been known by a different name, had carried a different reputation. But that was buried now, hidden beneath the facade of an ordinary soldier who happened to be too pretty for her own good. As she set up her communications equipment, Rachel caught snippets of conversation from the tactical team. "Bet she's never even fired her weapon in anger," Davis was saying. "Probably got through basic training on looks alone," another voice added. "I heard she transferred here from some cushy desk job at the Pentagon." "Makes sense. That's where they keep the pretty ones." Rachel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She transferred here by choice, specifically requesting assignment to a frontline infantry unit. But she couldn't explain that without revealing information that would raise uncomfortable questions. The training exercise began exactly as Rachel had predicted it would. Within 20 minutes, the tactical team had walked directly into an ambush scenario they should have seen coming. Their communications broke down, their formation scattered, and their extraction route was compromised. "Hayes," Sergeant Miller's voice crackled over the radio, panic evident despite his attempts to maintain authority. "We need immediate backup from command. Tell them we're taking heavy casualties." Rachel calmly relayed the message, but she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. She could see exactly how to salvage this disaster, exactly which positions needed to be taken to turn the tide. But she was just the communications operator, the pretty face in combat boots, whose job was to look good and relay messages. 20 minutes later, the exercise was declared a failure. As the team regrouped, faces flushed with embarrassment and frustration, Captain Reynolds delivered a scathing review of their performance. "Sloppy, predictable, and poorly coordinated," he concluded. "You walked into that ambush like a group of tourists." During the debrief, Rachel finally spoke up. "Sir, if I may, there was a clear sight line from the north building that could have provided early warning and covering fire." The room fell silent. Captain Reynolds looked at her with surprise, as if he'd forgotten she was capable of tactical thinking. "Thank you for that. Observation Specialist Hayes," he said slowly. "But communications personnel should focus on their primary duties." Sergeant Miller jumped in quickly. "Hayes, maybe save the Monday morning quarterbacking for someone who's actually been in a real firefight." The dismissal stung because it was so completely wrong. Rachel had been in more real firefights than most of these soldiers would see in their entire careers, but she couldn't say that. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "Understood, Sergeant." As the group filed out, Private Johnson lingered behind. "You were right about that sight line," he said quietly. "I saw it too. Could have changed everything." Rachel looked at the young soldier with appreciation. In a world where she was consistently underestimated and dismissed, his quiet validation meant more than he could know. "Sometimes being right isn't enough," she replied. "Sometimes you have to wait for the right moment to prove it." She didn't know it yet, but that moment was coming sooner than she thought. 3 weeks later, the whispers had grown into a constant background hum that followed Rachel wherever she went on base. She'd learned to tune out most of it, but some comments cut deeper than others. "I heard she's sleeping with someone at headquarters," Private Martinez speculated during chow hole conversations. "That's gotta be how she got her assignments." "Makes sense," Corporal Thompson agreed. "No way someone that's soft gets this far on merit alone." Rachel sat 2 tables away, mechanically eating her meal while pretending not to hear. But Johnson, who'd become a reliable ally, couldn't stay silent. "You guys don't know what you're talking about," he said firmly. "Hayes works harder than any of us." "Oh, please," Thompson shot back. "Working hard at what? Looking good for inspection? We've never even seen her fire her weapon." That was particularly frustrating because Rachel spent hours each week at the firing range, usually in the early morning before most soldiers were awake. She consistently scored expert marksman ratings, but somehow these achievements never made it into base gossip. The real problem wasn't just the comments. It was how they affected her assignments. Captain Reynolds had started giving her increasingly menial tasks: inventory management, file organization, equipment maintenance. Important work, but far below her actual capabilities. "Hayes," Sergeant Miller called out during the morning formation. "You'll be handling supply requisitions today. Make sure those forms are filled out nice and neat. I know you're good with paperwork." More snickers from the ranks. Rachel noticed how Davis smirked openly, clearly enjoying her relegation to clerical work. But Rachel had started paying closer attention to the dynamics around her. She noticed how certain soldiers seemed nervous when she was assigned to observation posts during exercises. She caught fragments of conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered rooms. Most intriguingly, she'd observed Captain Reynolds making encrypted phone calls immediately after exercises where her Tactical suggestions had proven accurate. There was something else, too. During a recent night patrol exercise, she'd spotted movement in a sector that should have been clear. Her report had been dismissed as probably just wildlife, but the next morning, security had quietly increased patrols in that exact area. Private. Johnson had noticed the pattern as well. During a break between training sessions, he approached her with obvious concern. "Something's not right around here," he said quietly. "The way they treat you, the way they ignore your input, it's like they're afraid of something." Rachel considered her words carefully. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been watching. You spot things others miss. You know things you shouldn't know. And every time you try to help, they shut you down like you're some kind of threat." He wasn't wrong, but Rachel couldn't explain without revealing information that would put both of them in danger. Her previous life, her real qualifications, her actual reason for being here, all of it had to remain buried. "Maybe they just don't trust new soldiers," she offered. Johnson shook his head. "I'm new too, but they don't treat me like I'm carrying classified secrets." The comment hit closer to home than he realized. Rachel was carrying secrets, ones that could change everything if they came to light. But she'd chosen this path deliberately, trading her extraordinary past for the chance at an ordinary future. That evening, as she cleaned her gear in preparation for the next day's exercises, Rachel found a note slipped under her door. It was written in block letters, obviously disguised handwriting. "Some of us see what you really are. Keep watching. Keep waiting. Your time is coming." Rachel stared at the note for a long moment, then carefully destroyed it. Someone on the base knew more than they were letting on. The question was whether they were friend or foe. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Captain Reynolds announced during formation that their unit had been selected for a special assignment, a high-priority mission that would test everything they'd trained for. "This is the real deal, people," he said, his voice carrying unusual weight. "Live ammunition, hostile territory, actual enemy combatants. Every skill you've learned, every exercise you've completed, has been preparing you for this moment." As he outlined the mission parameters, Rachel felt a familiar stirring in her chest. The combat awareness that had kept her alive through missions that officially never happened. This wasn't another training exercise. This was exactly the kind of operation she'd been designed for. But as the briefing continued, she realized with growing frustration that she was once again being assigned to communications duty, while soldiers with half her training and experience prepared for direct combat roles. She would be relegated to the rear, managing radio traffic. "Any questions?" Captain Reynolds asked as he concluded the briefing. This time, Rachel didn't hesitate. She stood and spoke clearly. "Sir, I believe my skills would be better utilized in a forward position." The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her, some surprised, others openly hostile. Sergeant Miller's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Specialist Hayes, your job is communications. Leave the real fighting to soldiers who were built for it." The comment drew the usual chuckles, but Rachel noticed something different in the sound, an edge of nervousness, as if some of the soldiers weren't entirely comfortable with the dismissal. "With respect, Sergeant," she continued, "I have relevant experience that could benefit the mission." "What experience?" Captain Reynolds asked, his tone suggesting he was indulging her rather than genuinely interested. Rachel hesitated. The truth was classified at levels that didn't officially exist, but she could hint at it without breaking security protocols. "Urban warfare, hostage rescue, counterterrorism operations," she said carefully. The laughter that followed was louder and more dismissive than usual. "Right?" Davis called out. "And I'm a Navy SEAL." More laughter, but Rachel noticed that Captain Reynolds wasn't laughing. Instead, he was studying her with an intensity that hadn't been there before. "We'll stick with the assigned roles," he said finally. Dismissed. As the formation dispersed, Johnson fell into step beside her. That was either very brave or very stupid, he said quietly. Maybe both, Rachel replied. What she didn't say was that she'd just made a decision that would change everything. She'd spent 6 months hiding her true nature, accepting dismissal and mockery in pursuit of a normal life. But some missions were too important for normal. If they wouldn't use her skills properly, she'd find another way to protect her fellow soldiers. Because that's what real warriors did. They served, regardless of recognition, regardless of respect, regardless of weather. Anyone understood what they were truly capable of. The mission was scheduled to begin in 72 hours. Rachel had that long to prepare for the moment when her two worlds, the hidden warrior and the dismissed, pretty face, would finally collide. The mission briefing room felt different on the second day. Captain Reynolds had received updated intelligence. That painted a grimmer picture of what they were walking into. Enemy strength has been revised upward, he announced, projecting tactical maps onto the wall screen. We're looking at approximately 40 hostile combatants in a fortified position, with additional reinforcements possible. Rachel studied the terrain layouts with growing concern. The approach routes were textbook examples of what not to do in hostile territory, too linear, too predictable, with insufficient fallback positions. Worse, the intelligence gaps were obvious to anyone who knew how to read between the lines. "Sir," she said, raising her hand. Captain Reynolds sighed audibly. "Yes, Specialist Hayes?" "The intelligence seems incomplete. There's no information about civilian populations, no details about possible underground tunnel systems, no assessment of enemy communication capabilities." Sergeant Miller interrupted before the captain could respond. "Hayes, intelligence briefings are above your pay grade. Stick to checking radio batteries." This time, the laughter felt forced. Even some soldiers who usually joined in seemed uncomfortable with the dismissal. The mission was real now, with real consequences, and Rachel's questions highlighted genuine concerns. "The specialist raises valid points," Private Johnson said, surprising everyone by speaking up. "Those are pretty basic intelligence requirements for an operation like this." "Johnson," Miller barked, "are you questioning your superiors?" "No, Sergeant. I'm questioning whether we have enough information to complete this mission safely." The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Rachel appreciated Johnson's support, but she could see he was putting his own career at risk. By defending her, Captain Reynolds studied the tactical displays for a long moment before responding. "Our intelligence is sufficient for the mission parameters. We proceed as planned." After the briefing, Rachel lingered to examine the maps more closely. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. The mission plan was fundamentally flawed, based on incomplete information and flawed assumptions. Soldiers were going to die if someone didn't intervene. "Still playing pretend soldier?" Davis's voice came from behind her. Rachel turned to face him, keeping her expression neutral. "Just familiarizing myself with the terrain." "Right, because communications operators need to know tactical details." His tone was openly mocking now. "Face it, Hayes, you're out of your depth here. This isn't some training exercise where you can impress everyone with lucky guesses." "And what if my guesses aren't lucky?" Rachel asked quietly. Something in her voice made Davis pause. For just a moment, his confident smirk wavered. "What's that supposed to mean?" Rachel looked back at the tactical display. "It means that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one who sees most clearly." She walked away, leaving Davis staring after her with a troubled expression. That evening, Rachel made a decision that would change everything. She accessed her personal equipment locker and retrieved items she hadn't touched since arriving at the base: encrypted communication devices, specialized tactical gear, and a small metal emblem that officially didn't exist. As she examined the emblem, a stylized Kraken wrapped around an anchor memories, flooded back. Missions accomplished against impossible odds. Lives saved through precision and sacrifice. A reputation built on competence rather than recognition. She buried that life deliberately, seeking the peace of anonymity. But peace was a luxury she couldn't afford when fellow soldiers were walking into a trap. Private Johnson found her in the equipment bay, checking her gear one final time. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. Rachel looked up from her rifle, a weapon she'd been maintaining far beyond standard requirements. "Just making sure everything's ready." Johnson sat down across from her, his expression serious. "Rachel, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Who are you really?" The question hung in the air between them. Rachel had been dreading this moment, but she'd also been preparing for it. "I'm exactly who I appear to be," she said carefully. "A soldier doing her job." "No," Johnson said firmly. "You're not. I've been watching you for months. The way you analyze terrain, the way you handle weapons, the way you move through combat exercises, that's not standard infantry training. That's something else entirely." Rachel set down her rifle and met his gaze. "What do you think you see?" "I think I see someone with advanced training pretending to be ordinary. I think I see someone who could probably save lives tomorrow if anyone would listen to her. And I think I see someone who's been carrying a secret that's eating her alive." The accuracy of his assessment was startling. Rachel had underestimated the young soldier's observational skills. "What if you're right?" she asked. "What if I am more than I appear to be? What difference would it make?" "It would make all the difference in the world," Johnson replied. "Because tomorrow we're walking into something bad. And if there's even a chance you can help us get through it alive, then everyone needs to know who you really are." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, weighing options and consequences. Finally, she reached into her gear bag and pulled out the Kraken emblem. Placing it on the table between them, Johnson stared at it, his eyes widening. "What is that?" "Something that doesn't officially exist," Rachel said quietly. "Something that represents missions that never happened, conducted by soldiers who were never there. And you're one of those soldiers?" "I was. Now I'm just Specialist Rachel Hayes, communications operator, who happens to know that tomorrow's mission is going to get people killed if someone doesn't do something about it." Johnson reached for the emblem, then stopped. "Can I?" Rachel nodded. He picked it up, examining the intricate details. "It's beautiful," he said, "and terrifying." "That's appropriate," Rachel replied, "because the people who earned the right to wear that emblem were both. What are you going to do?" Rachel took back the emblem and pinned it to her uniform, just below her regulation insignia. It was small enough that most people wouldn't notice it unless they were looking closely. "I'm going to do my job," she said. The real one. The next morning, as the unit assembled for final mission preparations, Rachel stood in formation with the small Kraken emblem clearly visible on her uniform. Most soldiers were too focused on their own gear to notice, but a few sharp eyes caught the unfamiliar insignia. Captain Reynolds was conducting final equipment checks. When his gaze fell on Rachel's emblem, he stopped mid-sentence, staring at the small piece of metal like he was seeing a ghost. "Specialist Hayes," he said slowly. "What is that on your uniform?" The entire formation turned to look. Rachel stood perfectly still, meeting the captain's gaze. "Unit identification, sir. That's not a regulation Army insignia." "No, sir, it's not." The silence stretched out, thick with tension and unspoken questions. Captain Reynolds looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "We'll discuss this after the mission," he said finally. But Rachel knew there wouldn't be an after not in the way he meant. Because in approximately 6 hours, everything was going to change. The transport helicopters were loading when Captain Reynolds pulled Rachel aside. his expression a mixture of confusion and growing suspicion. "Hayes, I need to know what that emblem means," he said, keeping his voice low enough that the other soldiers couldn't hear. Rachel had been preparing for this conversation. "It means I have training that might be relevant to this mission, sir." "What kind of training?" "The kind that's still classified, even for someone with your security clearance." Captain Reynolds stared at her for a long moment. "Are you telling me you're some kind of special operations soldier?" "I'm telling you that the mission plan has critical flaws that are going to get people killed, and I have the experience to help fix them." Before the captain could respond, Sergeant Miller approached, clearly agitated. "Sir, we need to load up. Transport window is closing." Captain Reynolds nodded, but kept his eyes on Rachel. "We'll continue this conversation in the field." As they boarded the helicopters, Rachel noticed she was drawing more attention than usual. The small emblem had been spotted by several soldiers, and word was spreading through quiet conversations and meaningful glances. Private Johnson, seated across from her in the helicopter, leaned forward during flight. "People are asking questions," he said, barely audible over the engine noise. Rachel nodded. "Let them ask." "Davis thinks you're some kind of fraud. He's telling people you probably bought that emblem online. Davis is entitled to his opinion. And Thompson thinks you might be undercover military intelligence." "Thompson's smarter than he looks." Johnson studied her face. "What's the real story, Rachel?" Rachel looked out the helicopter window at the terrain rushing past below. In 20 minutes, they'd be on the ground in hostile territory, executing a mission plan she knew was fundamentally flawed. "The real story," she said finally, "is that I used to be someone else. Someone who specialized in impossible missions and bringing everyone home alive. When that life ended, I chose to become ordinary. But ordinary doesn't work when extraordinary problems arise." The helicopter began its descent, and Rachel could see the landing zone approaching. It was exactly where she'd expected it to be too. Exposed, too far from cover, too predictable for any enemy force that had been watching for their arrival. "Listen to me carefully," she told Johnson. "When we hit the ground, stay close to me. Don't follow the standard formation patterns. And if something goes wrong, when something goes wrong, do exactly what I tell you, regardless of what anyone else orders." Johnson nodded, his young face serious with understanding. The helicopters touched down in a swirl of dust and rotor wash. As the soldiers disembarked and formed up, Rachel was already scanning the surrounding terrain with trained eyes. Everything about the situation felt wrong, too quiet, too easy, too much like the beginning of every trap she'd ever encountered. Captain Reynolds was coordinating with the pilots when Rachel approached him one final time. "Sir, I need to recommend immediate changes to our approach route." "Hayes, not now. Sir, with respect. If we proceed along the planned route, we're going to walk into an ambush within the first 10 minutes. Something in her voice made him pause. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because I've done this before. Many times. And the tactical signature here is identical to operations I've seen go wrong in catastrophic ways." Sergeant Miller overheard and intervened. "Captain, we don't have time for more of Hayes's fantasy scenarios. The mission timeline is fixed." Rachel looked directly at Captain Reynolds. "Sir, I'm officially requesting permission to take point. Position and modify our route based on advanced reconnaissance training." "What advanced reconnaissance training?" Miller demanded. Rachel didn't answer him. Instead, she maintained eye contact with Captain Reynolds and said quietly, "The kind that kept 47 hostages alive in Kandahar. The kind that stopped a terrorist cell from bombing 3 civilian targets in Syria. The kind that doesn't officially exist." Captain Reynolds went very still. "What did you just say?" "I said I have experience that's relevant to our current situation, and I'm requesting permission to use it." The captain stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he made a decision that surprised everyone, including Rachel. Hayes, you'll take forward reconnaissance position. Report any unusual activity immediately. Sergeant Miller looked stunned. Sir, she's a communications operator. Miller, execute the order. As the unit began moving out, Rachel felt a familiar shift in her consciousness, the transition from hidden observer to active operator. She moved to the front of the formation, and Johnson fell in beside her as she'd instructed. How do you feel? He asked quietly. Rachel checked her weapon one final time and adjusted her gear. Like myself, she said. For the first time in 6 months. Within 5 minutes of beginning their advance, Rachel held up her hand, signaling the formation to halt. She'd spotted movement in exactly the location she'd predicted enemy observers positioned to report their approach. Contact front, she whispered into her radio. 2 observers, approximately 300 meters, elevated position behind the ridgeline. Captain Reynolds moved up to join her. Are you certain? Rachel handed him her binoculars. Check B. 3rd tree from the left, halfway up the slope. You'll see the reflection from optical equipment. The captain looked where she indicated, and his expression changed immediately. Confirmed. 2 hostiles with observation equipment. The entire tone of the mission had shifted in that moment. Rachel wasn't the pretty communications operator anymore. She was the soldier who had spotted a threat that could have compromised their entire operation. What's your recommendation? Captain Reynolds asked. Rachel was already planning the tactical response. We neutralize the observers silently, then modify our approach to avoid the ambush they were meant to trigger. Ambush? Rachel pointed to a narrow valley between 2 hills, exactly where the original mission plan called for them to advance. Classic kill zone, she explained. Observers report our position. Hostile forces waiting concealed positions along the high ground, and they have clear fields of fire on anyone moving through that valley. Captain Reynolds looked at the terrain with new understanding. How do we avoid it? We don't avoid it, Rachel said. We turn it around on them. For the first time since she'd known him, Captain Reynolds looked at her with something approaching respect. What do you have in mind? Rachel smiled, not the polite expression she'd worn for 6 months, but the confident smile of someone who had just been given permission to be dangerous. I have an idea that's going to surprise everyone. 20 minutes later, the enemy observers lay unconscious, their equipment disabled, and the unit was in position for Rachel's modified approach. But that's when everything started to unravel in ways nobody had expected. Captain Reynolds received an encrypted message on his secure communication device. After reading it, his face went pale, and he immediately called Rachel over. Hayes, I just received priority intelligence from command. They want to know how you identified those observers. Rachel had been dreading this moment. Training and experience, sir. That's not specific enough. Command is asking for details about your background that apparently aren't in your official file. The other soldiers were beginning to take notice of the conversation. Sergeant Miller approached, clearly sensing something significant was happening. What's the problem, Captain? He asked. Captain Reynolds looked between Rachel and his communication device. The problem is that our communication specialist just prevented us from walking into an ambush using tactics and observations that suggest training well beyond her official qualifications. So she got lucky, Miller said dismissively. Miller, those observers were using advanced camouflage techniques that would be invisible to standard infantry training. She spotted them from 300 meters in poor lighting conditions. That's not luck. Private Johnson, who had been monitoring the perimeter, rejoined the group. Sir, there's something else. While Hayes was neutralizing those observers, I watched her movement patterns. That wasn't standard Army training either. Rachel realized her careful facade was crumbling rapidly. Every skill she demonstrated, every tactical decision she made, was adding to a picture that didn't match her official identity. "Hayes," Captain Reynolds said quietly, "I need you to tell me who you really are." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rachel looked around at the faces of her fellow soldiers, some suspicious, some curious, all waiting for an answer that would change everything. "I'm Specialist Rachel Hayes, 3rd Infantry Division," she said carefully. "That's not what I'm asking. And you know it." Sergeant Miller stepped forward, his expression hostile. "I'll tell you what I think. I think we've got a spy in our unit. Someone pretending to be a regular soldier while gathering intelligence on our operations." "Miller," Captain Reynolds began. "No, sir. Think about it. She shows up 6 months ago with a clean record, but skills that don't match her file. She asks questions about classified operations. She has equipment and knowledge she shouldn't possess. And now she's wearing some kind of unauthorized insignia that nobody recognizes." Several soldiers nodded agreement. Rachel could see suspicion spreading through the group like a contagion. "Sir," Private Thompson spoke up, "maybe we should contact base security and have her detained until this gets sorted out." Rachel felt the situation spiraling beyond her control. She'd spent 6 months building trust and acceptance, only to see it evaporate in minutes because she'd tried to protect them. "That might be wise," Captain Reynolds said reluctantly. "Hayes, I'm going to need you to surrender your weapons and communication equipment pending investigation." "Sir," Johnson protested, "she just saved our lives by spotting those observers." "Johnson, stand down." Rachel made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of complying, she took a step back and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Before you make any decisions about my trustworthiness," she said, "you should know that in approximately 10 minutes, a 12-man enemy patrol is going to crest that ridge to our east, looking for their missing observers." "How could you possibly know that?" Miller demanded. "Because I've been monitoring their radio communications on frequencies that aren't in your standard equipment package." She held up a small device that none of them had seen before, advanced electronic warfare equipment that was definitely not standard. "Army issue." Captain Reynolds stared at the device. "Where did you get that?" "The same place I got the training. To use it effectively, which is where, exactly?" Rachel took a deep breath. The moment of truth had arrived, whether she was ready for it or not. Joint Special Operations Command, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Task Force Designation, Kraken. The silence that followed was profound. Several soldiers exchanged glances, clearly recognizing some of those terms, even if they didn't understand their full significance. "Kraken?" Thompson whispered. "I've heard that name before. Isn't that the unit that doesn't officially exist?" Rachel finished. "Yes." Sergeant Miller laughed harshly. "Right, and I suppose you're going to tell us you're some kind of elite super soldier." "I'm telling you that I'm someone who chose to leave that world behind and serve as a regular soldier. But circumstances have made that choice impossible." She activated her electronic device, and immediately they could hear intercepted enemy communications, voices speaking in a foreign language, coordinating movement patterns and search procedures. "They're looking for their missing observers," she translated. "They'll be here in 8 minutes, and they're bringing enough firepower to overwhelm our current position." Captain Reynolds looked at his watch, then at the tactical situation, then back at Rachel. "If you're lying about any of this, then we'll all be dead in 9 minutes, and it won't matter." The captain made a command decision. "Everyone take defensive positions. Hayes, you maintain point position and continue monitoring enemy communications." "Sir," Miller protested, "you can't seriously be—" "Miller, execute the order or I'll have you relieved of duty." As the soldiers moved into position, Rachel felt a familiar calm settle over her. This was what she'd been trained for. Impossible situations, split-second decisions, protecting people who didn't fully understand what they were facing. Private Johnson took cover beside her. "So you really are some kind of special ops legend?" Rachel checked her weapon and adjusted her position to cover the most likely approach routes. "I really am someone who wants to make sure you all get home alive, even after the way they've treated you, especially because of the way they've treated me. Real warriors don't serve for recognition, Johnson. They serve because someone has to." Through her electronic intercepts, Rachel heard the enemy patrol change direction, exactly as she'd predicted. In 6 minutes, they'd be in direct contact. The question was whether her fellow soldiers would trust her enough to follow her lead when the shooting started. She was about to find out. The enemy patrol appeared exactly where and when Rachel had predicted. 12 heavily armed fighters moving in professional formation, communicating through hand signals, clearly experienced in combat operations. "Contact east," Rachel whispered into her radio. 12 hostiles, approximately 200 meters in closing. Captain Reynolds, positioned 20 meters to her left, raised his binoculars. "Confirmed. They're moving directly toward our position." Through her intercepted communications, Rachel could hear the enemy leader coordinating the search pattern. They were looking for their missing observers and had correctly deduced that a military patrol was responsible for their disappearance. "Sir," she said quietly, "they know we're here. This isn't a patrol, it's a hunting party." Sergeant Miller, despite his suspicions about Rachel, was professional enough to focus on the immediate threat. "What's our best tactical option?" Rachel was already calculating angles, cover positions, and optimal firing solutions. "They're expecting to find us in defensive positions. We give them what they expect, then flank them from an unexpected direction. That's a complicated maneuver under these conditions," Captain Reynolds observed. "Yes, sir, but it's our best chance of engaging 12 hostiles with our current numbers and surviving." Private Johnson, positioned beside her, spoke quietly. "What do you need us to do?" Rachel outlined her plan quickly. Half the unit would maintain position and engage the enemy directly, drawing their attention and fixing them in place. The other half would move through a concealed route to establish a flanking position, creating a crossfire that would neutralize the threat efficiently. "Who leads the flanking element?" Captain Reynolds asked. "I do," Rachel replied without hesitation. Miller immediately objected. "Sir, she's still unverified. We can't trust a critical maneuver to someone whose background we don't even know." "Miller, her background got us this far alive. Her background might be completely fabricated." The enemy patrol was now within 100 meters. There was no time for extended debate. "Sir," Rachel said calmly, "in about 30 seconds, they're going to spot our forward position and we'll be in direct combat whether we're ready or not. I can either help you win this engagement, or you can court-martial me after we're all dead." Captain Reynolds looked at the approaching enemy forces, then at Rachel, then made the kind of decision that separates good officers from great ones. "Hayes, take Johnson, Davis, and Thompson. Execute your flanking maneuver. Miller, you're with me on the primary position." Sergeant Miller looked like he wanted to argue, but the sound of voices speaking a foreign language carried across the terrain, too close for comfort. "Move," Captain Reynolds ordered. Rachel led her small team through a route she'd identified during their initial reconnaissance, shallow drainage ditch that provided concealment while allowing rapid movement to the enemy's flank. As they moved, she could hear the intercepted communications becoming more urgent. "They found our original position," she whispered to her team. 60 seconds until contact." Davis, despite his previous mockery, was professional enough to follow her lead. "What's the timing on this?" "We wait for them to engage the primary position. Then we hit them from their blind side. Clean, coordinated, overwhelming force." As they reached their position, Rachel could see the enemy patrol spreading out to assault the main defensive position. They were good, disciplined, coordinated, dangerous. But they were also predictable. Through her earpiece, she heard Captain Reynolds' voice. Enemy in sight. Preparing to engage. Wait for my signal, Rachel responded. Let them commit to their assault. The firefight erupted exactly as she'd anticipated. The enemy patrol engaged the primary position with concentrated firepower, confident they'd located their quarry. For 30 seconds, the battle seemed to favor the attackers. Then Rachel spoke one word into her radio. Execute. Her flanking team opened fire from the enemy's unprotected side. The crossfire was devastating and immediate. Within moments, the enemy patrol found themselves caught between two positions, taking casualties from unexpected directions. But something else happened that nobody had expected. As the gunfire intensified, Rachel stood up from her covered position and called out in a clear, carrying voice, Kraken! The effect was immediate and stunning. The enemy fighters, who had been maintaining discipline under fire, suddenly broke formation, not retreating, tactically running in obvious panic. Cease. Fire, Rachel ordered. They're retreating. Within minutes, the battlefield was quiet except for the sound of enemy footsteps disappearing into the distance. Captain Reynolds approached the flanking position, his expression a mixture of amazement and confusion. What just happened? He asked. You won the engagement, sir. No, I mean, what happened when you called out that word? They ran like they'd seen a ghost. Rachel was reloading her weapon, her movements efficient and practiced. Reputation can be a weapon too, sir. Private Johnson was staring at her with undisguised awe. They knew who you were. They actually knew who you were. Some enemies have long memories, Rachel replied. Sergeant Miller approached, his hostility replaced by grudging respect. Ace, that was the most professional tactical maneuver I've seen in 15 years of service. Thank you, Sergeant. But I still don't understand what you are. Rachel finished checking her equipment and looked at the assembled soldiers' men who had dismissed her, mocked her, and underestimated her for 6 months. I'm someone who used to have a different job, she said simply. Someone who carried a different name and a different reputation. Someone who chose to walk away from that life because I thought ordinary service would be more meaningful. Captain Reynolds was monitoring his radio communications. Ace, I'm getting requests from command for a full debrief on this engagement. They want to know how we neutralized a superior enemy force with 0 casualties. Tell them good tactics and better soldiers. They're also asking specifically about intercepted communications mentioning the word Kraken. They want to know if we have any information about reported Kraken unit activity in this area. Rachel met his gaze steadily. What are you going to tell them? I'm going to tell them that Specialist Rachel Hayes prevented an ambush, executed a flawless flanking maneuver, and demonstrated tactical skills that saved American lives. Everything else is above my clearance level. For the first time in 6 months, Rachel felt something approaching respect from her commanding officer, Dodd, as they prepared to continue their mission. Private Thompson approached her hesitantly. Hayes, I owe you an apology. We all do. No apologies necessary. Yes, there are. We judged you by your appearance instead of your abilities. That was wrong. Rachel looked at the young soldier, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since arriving at the base. Thompson, you want to know what I learned in my previous assignment? The most dangerous enemies are the ones you underestimate. But the most valuable allies are the ones who prove themselves when it matters most. And which category do we fall into? Rachel smiled, the first genuinely warm expression any of them had seen from her. You're the soldiers who trusted me when the shooting started. That makes you the kind of people I'd follow into any battle. As they moved out to continue their mission, the dynamic of the unit had fundamentally changed. Rachel was no longer the pretty communications operator who might or might not belong. She was the soldier who had demonstrated capabilities none of them fully understood, but all of them had learned to respect. The mission was far from over, but the most important battle, the one for trust and recognition, had just been won. 3 hours later, the unit's primary mission objective came into view. A fortified compound where high-value targets were reportedly planning coordinated attacks on civilian infrastructure. The intelligence briefing had described it as lightly defended, suitable for a straightforward assault. Rachel immediately knew the intelligence was wrong. "Sir," she said, studying the compound through her binoculars, "we have a problem." Captain Reynolds joined her at the observation point. "What are you seeing?" "That's not a lightly defended position. Look at the sightlines, the overlapping fields of fire, the prepared positions. This is a hardened military installation designed to repel exactly the kind of assault we're planning." Sergeant Miller, who had been silent since the earlier engagement, spoke up. The intelligence clearly stated minimal enemy presence. "The intelligence was either outdated or deliberately misleading," Rachel replied. "Sir, I count at least 20 fighting positions, multiple crew-served weapons, and what appears to be prepared explosive obstacles." Captain Reynolds lowered his binoculars. "Are you saying the mission is impossible?" "I'm saying the mission is planned will result in heavy casualties for minimal gain. But there's another option." She activated her electronic warfare equipment and began scanning radio frequencies. Within minutes, she'd intercepted multiple communication streams from inside the compound. "They know we're coming," she announced. "They've been monitoring our approach for the last hour." Private Johnson, who had become her unofficial translator for the rest of the unit, asked, "What are they saying?" Rachel listened for several more minutes, her expression growing increasingly serious. "They're not just waiting for us. They're planning to use our assault as propaganda. They want to film American soldiers being killed and broadcast it as a recruiting tool." The implications hit the unit like a physical blow. They weren't walking into a tactical engagement. They were walking into a deliberate massacre designed for maximum political impact. "Sir," Sergeant Miller said quietly, "what are our options?" Captain Reynolds was about to respond when his radio crackled with an incoming message from Base Command. "Alpha Team, this is Base Command. You are ordered to proceed with assault as planned. Mission parameters are unchanged." Rachel looked at Captain Reynolds with growing alarm. "Sir, request permission to communicate directly with Command." "Hayes, that's outside your..." "Sir, with respect, Command doesn't have the intelligence we've gathered. They don't know what we're actually facing." "Alpha Team," the radio crackled again. "Acknowledge receipt of orders and confirm mission timeline." Captain Reynolds picked up his radio, then hesitated. "Base Command, this is Alpha Team Leader. We've encountered complications that may require mission modification." "Alpha Team, you are ordered to proceed immediately. No modifications authorized." Rachel stepped closer to Captain Reynolds. "Sir, that's not a normal command response. Someone wants us to walk into that compound regardless of the tactical situation. What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that either Command has been compromised, or we're being deliberately sent into a trap for reasons that have nothing to do with the stated mission objectives." The accusation hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. Suggesting that their own command structure might be corrupt was the kind of statement that could end careers or save lives. Private Thompson spoke up. "Hayes, that's a serious allegation." "Yes, it is. And if I'm wrong, I'll face a court-martial. But if I'm right, and we follow those orders, most of you won't live to see another sunrise." Captain Reynolds looked at his radio, then at the fortified compound, then at the faces of his soldiers. "Hayes, if your assessment is correct, what would you recommend?" Rachel had been preparing for this question since the moment she'd seen the compound. We abort the mission. We withdraw to a safe position and request immediate clarification from a higher command authority. Someone with the clearance level to understand what's really happening here. And if command orders us to proceed anyway? Rachel met his gaze directly. Then, you have to decide whether you're an officer who follows orders or an officer who protects his soldiers. Sergeant Miller, who had been listening to this exchange with growing unease, finally spoke up. Sir, in 15 years of service, I've never heard Hayes wrong about a tactical assessment. If she says we're walking into a trap, maybe we should listen. The radio crackled again. Alpha Team, you are ordered to commence assault immediately. Failure to comply will result in disciplinary action. Captain Reynolds stared at the radio for a long moment, then made a decision that would define the rest of his career. Base Command, this is Alpha Team Leader. We are encountering heavy resistance and require immediate support before proceeding. Alpha. Team, proceed with mission as ordered. Base Command, we are taking casualties and cannot proceed without reinforcement. It was a lie, but it was a lie designed to protect his soldiers while buying time to understand what was really happening. Rachel watched this exchange with approval. Sir, request permission to contact Alternative Command Authority. Do it. Rachel activated her encrypted communications equipment, gear that officially didn't exist, connecting to channels that weren't supposed to be available to regular Army units. Oversight Authority, this is Kraken 7 requesting immediate verification of mission parameters for Alpha Team current operation. The response was immediate. Kraken 7, this is Oversight Control. Stand by for authentication. After a brief electronic handshake, the voice returned. Authentication confirmed. Kraken 7, what is your current status? Alpha Team has been ordered to assault a hardened position with inadequate intelligence and support. Request verification that this mission is authorized at appropriate command levels. Stand by, Kraken 7. The soldiers watched in fascination as Rachel conducted a conversation with military authorities they'd never heard of, using protocols they didn't recognize. After several minutes, the voice returned. Kraken 7, mission authorization has been revoked. Alpha Team is ordered to withdraw immediately and await new instructions. Rachel turned to Captain Reynolds. Sir, the mission has been officially canceled by Joint Special Operations Command. We are ordered to withdraw. Captain Reynolds looked relieved and confused in equal measure. How did you just do that? Sometimes having friends in high places is useful, Rachel replied. As they prepared to withdraw, Private Johnson approached her with a question that had been bothering him. Rachel, why didn't you use those connections months ago? Why endure all the mockery and dismissal when you could have proven who you were at any time? Rachel packed her specialized equipment carefully before answering. Because proving who I was would have changed everything. Once people know you're extraordinary, they start expecting extraordinary things. They stop treating you like a person and start treating you like a weapon. And you didn't want to be a weapon? I wanted to be a soldier. There's a difference. Weapons are used until they break. Soldiers choose how to serve. As they moved away from the compound, Captain Reynolds fell into step beside her. Hayes, what happens now? Now you write your report honestly. You explain that intelligence was flawed, that the mission parameters were inappropriate for the tactical situation, and that your communications operator prevented a potential disaster. And what about your alternative identity? Rachel looked back at the compound. They were leaving behind a position that would have cost most of their lives if they'd followed their original orders. What alternative identity, sir? I'm Specialist. Rachel Hayes, communications operator, who happened to have the right equipment at the right time. But they both knew that simple explanation wouldn't satisfy the investigation that was certain to follow. 2 weeks later, Rachel stood at attention in a conference room at Fort Braxton, facing a panel of officers whose ranks and credentials made it clear this was no ordinary debriefing. Colonel Marcus Webb, a man whose very presence suggested connections to classified operations, led the inquiry. "Specialist Hayes," he began, "your actions during the mission in question have raised several interesting questions." "Yes, sir." "You prevented what our analysis suggests would have been a catastrophic engagement, using equipment and protocols that aren't part of standard Army inventory." "Yes, sir." "You communicated with command authorities using channels that officially don't exist." "Yes, sir." Colonel Webb leaned forward. "Would you care to explain how a communications specialist acquired such capabilities?" Rachel had spent 2 weeks preparing for this moment. "Sir, I believe my personnel file contains all relevant information about my background and qualifications." "Your personnel file," Webb said dryly, "indicates that you're a communications specialist with standard Army training, nothing more." "Then perhaps the file is incomplete, sir." Webb smiled, not a friendly expression, but one of professional appreciation. "Specialist Hayes, we've conducted an extensive investigation into your background. What we've discovered is quite remarkable." He activated a display screen showing mission reports, photographs, and commendations, all heavily redacted, but clearly indicating an extraordinary service record. Operation Desert Phantom, Operation Crimson Tide, Operation Steel Rain. He paused between each name, letting them sink in. Missions that saved hundreds of lives and prevented attacks on civilian populations. The other officers in the room were studying the displayed information with obvious interest. "Sir," Rachel said carefully, "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating directly that you are former Kraken unit, one of the most decorated operators in the history of special operations, who chose to disappear into regular Army service for reasons we don't fully understand. And if that were true, sir, if that were true, it would represent a significant waste of exceptional capabilities." Webb stood and walked around the table to face her directly. "It would also represent the kind of character and integrity that this military desperately needs in leadership positions." Rachel remained at attention, but her mind was racing. "Sir?" "Specialist Hayes, you are hereby promoted to the rank of Staff Sergeant and reassigned to the Special Operations Training Command as a primary instructor." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Sir, I didn't request a transfer." "No, you didn't. But your country is requesting your continued service in a capacity that matches your actual abilities." Another officer spoke up, General Patricia Adams, whose presence indicated this decision had been made at the highest levels. "Sergeant Hayes, you've spent 6 months proving that you can serve with honor and humility regardless of recognition. Now we're asking you to serve where your experience can do the most good." "Ma'am, I chose regular service for personal reasons." "We understand that. But sometimes personal preferences have to yield to professional obligations." Colonel Webb returned to his seat. "Your new assignment comes with certain accommodations. You'll be training the next generation of special operations soldiers, but you'll also have the option to serve in an advisory capacity rather than active operational roles." Rachel considered this carefully. "What does that mean, sir?" "It means you can teach without having to return to the kind of missions that prompted you to seek anonymity. You can help others develop the skills you've mastered without putting yourself back in harm's way." General Adams added, "It also means you'll be working with soldiers who understand what exceptional service looks like. No more hiding your capabilities. No more pretending to be less than you are." For the first time since the briefing began, Rachel allowed herself to consider the possibility. "What about my current unit, ma'am?" "Your current unit will receive commendations for exceptional performance during a classified operation. Captain Reynolds is being considered for promotion. and the enlisted personnel involved will receive recognition appropriate to their contributions. Webb smiled again, and this time it seemed genuinely warm. They'll also receive the truth about who served alongside them. Not the classified details, but enough to understand that they were learning from someone extraordinary. Rachel thought about Private Johnson, about the growth she'd seen in the young soldiers under her informal mentorship, about the potential to guide others away from the mistakes that pride and prejudice could create. "Sir, if I accept this assignment, will I be able to maintain contact with my former unit?" "Encouraged to maintain contact," Webb replied. "Good mentorship doesn't end with a transfer." General Adams stood, indicating the formal portion of the briefing was concluded. "Sergeant Hayes, you have 48 hours to consider this assignment. Whatever you decide, your service record speaks for itself. You've proven that exceptional soldiers can serve with exceptional humility." As the other officers filed out, Colonel Webb remained behind. "Off the record," he said when they were alone, "what made you choose regular Army service after Kraken unit?" Rachel relaxed slightly for the first time in the briefing. "I wanted to remember what we were fighting for, sir. In special operations, you see the worst of human nature. You deal with threats and violence and the kind of evil that can make. You forget there are good people worth protecting. And did regular service remind you?" Rachel thought about Johnson's quiet courage, about Captain Reynolds' willingness to trust her when it mattered, about soldiers who had overcome their prejudices, to follow her lead when lives were at stake. "Yes, sir, it did." "Then you'll make an exceptional instructor." 3 months later, Staff Sergeant Rachel Hayes stood before her first class of Special Operations candidates. They were young, eager, and filled with the kind of confidence that came from knowing they were among the military's best. "I'm going to begin," she said, with a story about assumptions. She told him about 6 months in a regular Army unit, about soldiers who judged by appearances, about the danger of underestimating people based on surface characteristics. "The most dangerous enemy," she concluded, "is the one you dismiss. But the most valuable ally is the one who proves their worth when it matters most." A young soldier raised his hand. "Sergeant, what's the most important lesson for someone entering special operations?" Rachel thought about everything she'd learned, everything she'd lost, and everything she'd gained. That extraordinary capabilities are meaningless without ordinary virtues: courage, integrity, humility, and the willingness to serve something larger than yourself. Master those, and the tactical skills will follow. After class, she found a message waiting on her desk. It was from Private Johnson, who had been promoted to corporal and was serving as a squad leader. "Thank you for teaching us that strength comes in many forms," it read. "Your example changed how we see ourselves and how we treat others. The unit isn't the same without you, but it's better because of what you left behind." Rachel smiled and began composing her reply. She had found her balance, no longer hiding her capabilities, but using them to build others up rather than tear enemies down. Sometimes, the greatest victory wasn't winning a battle. It was helping others understand what was truly worth fighting for. And sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't in your hands, but in your character. The girl they'd called a show pony soldier had become exactly what she'd always been, a warrior who understood that the strongest battles were won not with bullets, but with the quiet courage to serve others regardless of recognition. She had found her way home, not to a place, but to a purpose that honored both her extraordinary past and her ordinary humanity. In the end, that was the most important mission of all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our everyday life. Stories community, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.